I'd like to acknowledge, as the University of Queensland acknowledges, the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet here in Brisbane, and as well where you folks are. We pay our respects to their ancestors and to their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. I also want to acknowledge, before we go too much further, that the presentation will be recorded for later use. So if you don't wish to be recorded, please leave your video off and post comments in the chat. And I've turned off my gallery view for now, but Christine, I hope that you're on the case and that the recording is happening. I'm not seeing that come up on my screen, but perhaps it's on yours, folks. I'm just going to...
yeah, we're recording, Winifred.
We are recording, thanks. Also present today, and I'm sorry I didn't put you on the slide, is Charlie Crimston, who will be speaking, and who's agreed to be part of the organizing for the new Political and Environmental Psychology and Social Science seminar series. So today is really the introduction to the seminar series, why and what. And since it's a collaboration of SIGN, NES, and the Social Change Lab, as well as everyone here today, we welcome your energy and hope you'll come in. There'll be different speakers involved. Our first speaker is going to be Yolanda Yetten. Yolanda, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Winifred. Before starting, I really would like to acknowledge that this is really, the origin of this is really coming from Winifred, who organized us all. And she will talk a little bit more about her great vision to take over the world later on. And so that will be great. But I just want to acknowledge that it's great, Winifred, that you got us all organized. And I'm quite thrilled about what we're trying to achieve here. And we hope, of course, to get many of you along with us in this thing that we're trying to achieve. So what I would like to do is simply talk a little bit about our background as SIGN. Many of you actually already know us, so I hope it's not becoming too repetitive. And maybe also talk a little bit about why we're interested in this initiative that Winifred has initiated. And and also probably sort of to showcase a little bit about what we're hoping to achieve. And then I'll hand over to Charlie. So as you all know, SIGN is the Social Identity and Groups Network. And what I did in a couple of slides is simply list, I took a few of the projects that people have been working on to just give you a brief flavor of what we're all about. So can I ask you to press to continue, Winifred? You're running the yeah, okay. Yeah. So just on our website, you will see that we have a few themes that we're working on, and it is really looking at it from a diverse sort of disciplinary angles. We have social psychologists, organizational psychologists, clinical health, and also political scientists, political psychologists. So one of the big themes that we're working on is crisis recovery. And I put a few examples of the projects that many people in our group are working on. I haven't covered everything, so apologies if I excluded a few people, not my intention. But as you can see, that if we talk about crisis recovery, there is an idea that social identity processes are quite important in, rebuilding after major disasters. That has to do with leadership, but also things like mental health in the recovery from pandemics and other sides of crises, quite traumatic events. And one of the things that we're also looking at is the sort of structural backgrounds to how they actually stand in the way of crisis recovery, things like social class, inequality, poor leadership, etc. So if I can have the next slide. Another major theme, as you will know, is leadership and followership. And again, I put a few examples there of projects that people are working on right now. It has to do with leadership in the workplace, but also more leadership more generally in the political arena. It has also to do, keywords are moral polarization, it's about leader destabilization, and we're also looking at authoritarian leadership, again, in the context of the leaders that we elect. Can I have the next slide? Political engagement it's a big topic. A lot of us are working on collective action research. Fiona, in particular, is a expert in the contact hypothesis. Does a lot of work on that, prejudice and stereotyping too. And for instance, Hema is doing quite a bit on history, how we represent our group's history, and how we actually connect our past narratives about who we are and where we actually feel that we're going as a group. And then interestingly too, Cecilo finished a PhD a little while ago already looking at religious identity and also willingness to take collective action, but also more extremist behavior on the basis of religious identity. Can I have the next slide, Winifred? And then we have other projects that have more to do with inequality in society, how inequality is associated, what particular outcomes inequality is associated with. There's also the idea of polarization. That's something that Charlie does an awful lot of work on, how societies become more divided, schisms within societies along sort of ideological lines, and what are the consequences of that. But you can again see quite a lot of other themes here too, which have to do with boundaries between groups. Christina is doing an interesting PhD on that, trans rights that she's looking at, and womanhood. And again, Belen is looking, for instance, at the recent a referendum in Chile about whether they should accept a new constitution, and she looks at how, depending on class, people actually look at that referendum and how they actually voted for or against that referendum. Okay, can I have the next one, please? I think this is the last slide. A big topic of researchers in our group has to do with social identity change. And again, a few projects there. A lot of it has to do actually with crisis recovery. Michael is looking at communities that were affected by the bushfires. Nat, one of our PhD students, is looking hopefully soon in Lismore at all the people affected there by the recent floods. And there's quite a lot there too about how, for instance, perceptions of continuity between past and present identities, how that affects how people actually cope with change and how they grow after, well, actually develop following major sort of changes to their lives. I believe that's the next one. Oh no, oh, sorry. I mostly went with what was on our website, but I just want to highlight a few other projects that we still need to add to the website. And I find it really exciting to have Chris Klebel on board, who's recently joined us as a postdoc. Chris is really looking at willingness to endorse climate change action, and exactly what kind of action do people endorse? Do they want to have more sort of structural change, or to actually make sure that effects of climate change are being mitigated? Or are they simply saying, look, leave it up to the individuals and nudge them towards greater recycling, etc.? So those are a very interesting line of research. Kelly, of course, is doing an awful lot of work on environmental attitudes. She will talk more about that. Winifred is, of course, our expert in terms of norms and identity contents. Alex, who has done a lot of work on leadership and in particular in the light of the recovery from COVID, how leadership can hinder progress and recovery, and also what a good leader should be doing when faced with a crisis. And then finally, Frank Moles, political scientist who brings expertise on party politics and elections. So before I hand over to Charlie, again, I would just like to say that I'm very keen to develop this, and we very much hope that it will become this sort of initiative. PEPSS will be something that people will join us on a monthly basis to listen to seminars, leapfrogging events that Winifred will talk a little bit more about in a minute, so that we can really get a sort of a genuine interdisciplinary approach and knowledge exchange on topics that we all care very much about, environmental issues, but also lots of issues to do with political science, political psychology research, because I think it's very clear that the idea is really that we're all doing great work, but still it is rather siloed. And it would be great if we can really connect a bit more across disciplines and see this as a bit of a platform to do so. All right, can I hand over to you, Charlie?
Great. Thanks, Yolanda. And Charlie, if you want to just go ahead and start speaking. I think this is your slide, Yolanda, probably just highlighting the recent Vibrant Science Summer School here, which just shows new generations of students coming into the SIGN network and starting to do brilliant work. Looking forward to that.
I know that was my slide, Winifred.
Was it? Well done, Charlie. I just thought it kind of heartwarming evidence of brilliance going on. Go ahead.
Thank you. So thanks, Winifred, Yolanda, and Kelly. So for those that don't know me, my name's Charlie Crimston. I'm a research fellow within the SIGN group at UQ. So as we just saw, SIGN is a really diverse group, has a wide range of research interests and projects. In many cases, hence the last slide, this research is really being driven by ECRs and postdocs and PhD students within the group. And I think that this is where the diversity within SIGN is perhaps most evident. And I think this group has a lot to contribute to the seminar series. So as a SIGN ECR member and as part of the PEPSS working group, I just wanted to really briefly talk about some of the benefits of PEPSS from an ECR perspective as I see them. And yeah, hopefully do my bit to drum up a bit of enthusiasm for what I think is a really great initiative. So there'll be a range of great opportunities for SIGN ECRs. And of course, any ECR that wants to be a part of PEPSS. It's going to provide opportunities to build and expand networks across a range of fields. This is something that can be quite challenging. So this includes a range of fields within psychology, but also more broadly across the social sciences. It's also going to provide a platform to share and promote your research, again, because of the wide appeal, I think, of PEPSS. I think that will be hopefully to a pretty broad and diverse audience. There's going to be some opportunities to build your CV. So yeah, Winifred's going to talk about the Leapfrog initiative in a bit. And I encourage you all to be a part, to join that and contribute to that. But yeah, PEPSS also is focused on ensuring we have this diverse and inclusive approach, that we can provide a platform for a range of voices to discuss a range of really important issues. And I think this is something that's really important to the whole team. And finally, PEPSS has a big focus on policy, which I think to ECRs can seem like a bit of a mystery. So I think it'd be really great to encourage us how to think more about policy, both in terms of the relevance of our own work and just learning more about how that can be achieved. So yeah, I'm really excited about the sessions we have planned and the topics we've discussed for future seminars. They're really exciting. So I strongly encourage ECRs to get involved with PEPSS. You should have a better idea about what it is and how to do that at the end of the session. but please do feel free to reach out if you have questions. And that's it from me. Thanks, Winifred.
Great. Thanks, Charlie. And now we're going to hear from someone who's been doing interdisciplinary research since long before it was fashionable and long before this initiative, and that's Kelly Fielding. And she's, of course, located at the University of Queensland in the Interdisciplinary School of Communication and Art. So Kelly, would you like to just jump in here? You might be muted, or you're not coming up on the...
Okay, sorry about that, Winifred. The old you're on mute.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Winifred. It's always wonderful to have a colleague like Winifred who's got such amazing passion and enthusiasm and ideas, and you know, we can just kind of trail along in her wake. And so she's asked me to talk about an interdisciplinary network that I organise called the Network of Environmental Social Scientists. And you can see here that we have a website. So everything that I say today is going to be, you know, you can find actually on the website. So before I talk about NEST, though, I wanted to just take a step back, Winifred. Yes, thank you, Winifred, and kind of talk a little bit about the sort of bigger picture context, the reason why we as social scientists might focus on environmental issues in the first instance. So this is a slide from a paper that was released a few years ago by Ripple and colleagues. And this was 15,000 scientists from 184 countries really issuing us with a dire warning, you know, telling us, you know, as humans, we're on this collision course with the natural world, and we're not doing the work as stewards that we need to do to avoid vast human misery. And pointing out the fact that, you know, we're already experiencing catastrophic climate change. We're already experiencing runaway deforestation, mass species extinction, increased ocean dead zones, falling freshwater availability. And although I think many people would think about these as issues that scientists or technology need to solve, the reality is that as humans, we have mostly been the cause of these problems. And if we recognize that we are mostly the cause of these problems, then we also have to recognize that we need to be the ones coming up with the solutions. And yes, we do need science and we do need technology, but we also need to know what are the policy mechanisms, what are the political mechanisms, what are the economic mechanisms, what is the behavior change. All of these issues are you know, or solutions are ones that social scientists can really contribute to. And so, you know, we have a really critical and important role to play as psychologists, as social scientists in addressing these issues. And I think what I find really heartening is that in the years that I've been doing interdisciplinary research, and it's a really exciting space to work in, I've found that you know, whether they're engineers or conservation biologists or ecologists or whoever I'm working with, they really see the role for psychologists and social scientists. They're very enthusiastic about, you know, coming together with them. All the people I've worked with, of course, this is a biased sample because they're working with me in the first place, but I do think this is sort of increasing recognition of the critical role that psychology and environmental social science play in this space. So having said that, having set the scene, let me tell you a bit about NEST. So let me start by talking about the genesis of NEST. So way back in around about 2011-12, I was fortunate enough to get a Australian Research Council Future Fellowship. Gave me a bit of breathing space, you know, and you know, I really sort of oriented my work much more to environmental psychology. I was the only environmental psychologist at UQ at the time, and I started to feel a bit lonely. And so, you know, even though I'm an introvert, I feel like I'm part of a group or a community. And so I decided I would look around and see who at UQ is a social scientist doing work in the environment. So I went and I looked up every website of every school and every faculty and institute to try to identify social scientists who are doing work addressing environmental issues. And it was amazing. There were so many people out there at UQ, but spread right across the university. And so, you know, here was my community. The next step is, how do we bring these people together? And I think because we were also spread out across the university, a lot of people just simply weren't aware, of what other people were doing. So this was really the inspiration to form the network of environmental social scientists. Next slide, please, Winifred. And so, of course, you could do these things by yourself, but it's so much more fun to do them with other people. And so my co-founder of NESS was Tiffany Morrison. She's a professor up at JCU these days. But at the time, she was whatever the former school that is now School of Earth and Environmental Sciences is actually called. And so Tiffany came from a very disciplinary background to me, and we often had different ideas, but that's a great thing, right? Because, you want to collaborate with people who've got different skills and abilities and networks to you. And actually one day she was sitting next to the executive dean of the science faculty and telling him about NESS, and he said, here, have some funding. So, to kickstart NESS. And so that was a really, we were really well funded for a few years, which was a great thing. It meant we could actually kind of bring in keynote speakers for our annual forum. For example, our very first ever forum, we had Professor Carmen Lawrence. For those of you who are not familiar with the Australian context, she's the former Premier of Western Australia, who is in fact a psychologist, and after leaving politics has gone back into academia and is focused on environmental issues. Now, these other faces that I show here are wonderful young scholars, some of them. Miranda Mills is now in the UK, Megan Evans is now a DECRA Fellow at UNSW, and the wonderful Angela Dean. And most recently, my good long-time colleague and friend, Professor Matthew Hornsey, who currently co-sponsors the NESS seminar as the, the leader of the Business Sustainability Initiative in the UQ Business School. So this is all by way of saying, this is not a kind of one-person show. There've been lots of people who kind of steered NESS and help it kind of stay on track. Next slide, please, Winifred. So what do we do? What we've set out to do is to try to create collaborations amongst environmental social scientists, both here at UQ, but also beyond, to try to connect the environmental social scientists that are here at UQ with scholars in other disciplines, with the conservation biologists or the engineers or whoever, but also with government, people in government and industry. So we have a very large mailing list for NESS, and many of the people that are on that mailing list are in industry and government. Next slide, please, Winifred. So the guiding, principles of NESS are to try to identify what we as social scientists can contribute to solving environmental issues, how we can, as I said before, build those collaborations between environmental social science here at UQ, but around Australia, but also with scholars in different disciplines, and also with industry and government. And to think about how we can grow the environmental social science discipline more broadly here in Australia. And then final slide, Winifred. And so I think I mentioned to you that we did at one point run an annual forum. We may go back to that again once the money is swishing around a little more freely in the university, but we have always run a seminar series, and I've shown you here on the slide some of the seminars that we've had this year. They've all been really great talks, and so if you've missed any and you think, wow, that sounds fascinating, you can watch and listen to the recordings if you go to the website. So most recently we had a fantastic talk about tackling plastic pollution from Anya Phelan in the business school and Emeritus Professor Helen Ross. We've had Beck Colvin from ANU come and talk about climate action in those coal mining communities in Australia. We've had Dr. Arns Verkammen talk about coping with eco-anxiety and pandemic. The wonderful Matthew Hornsey talking about climate science culture wars, and so on and so forth, including the amazing John Cork, who talked about interdisciplinary responses to climate misinformation. And I should just finish up by saying that, with any of these kinds of initiatives that you form, I think you have to look to the small wins and the small successes, because they are the way that you build the bigger successes. And so, for example, at the most recent, after the most recent seminar, I was contacted by someone in government that said, I saw that seminar, that's really wonderful work that's happening. I'm working in circular economy in government. Can you please put me in contact with, Anya and Helen, which I was really happy to do, and went, yay. A past success was a keynote speech from a the director of the Climate Change Communication Hub at Monash University, who got invited the same day to go and meet with Queensland government. And that is the reason when you watch the ABC News or 7 News that you will see climate reporting in the weather reports. It's because of that forum and that keynote speech. So yeah, so those small wins are, can hopefully build into bigger successes. So let me just finish by saying that I'm really happy to be here today. I'm excited that Winifred has had the passion and enthusiasm and energy to want to put this seminar series together, and Ness is very happy to be part of that and to promote it amongst the group of people that we already have contacts with. I'll finish there. Thanks, Winifred.
Thanks, Kelly. So now I'm going to go into my own, approach to the whole PEPSS series. And I need to acknowledge that it started with an incredible stroke of fortune, both good and bad. So what happened was, a couple of years ago, I was contacted by a woman named Mary Lee, and she was a clinical psychologist who had trained at UQ with Cindy Galwa. And she is a lifelong activist for democracy, peace, and the environment in Hong Kong. And she had this terrible thing where she found out she had an ovarian cancer diagnosis. And at the time she found out, she only had weeks to live. So she looked around at that stage and was thinking about how to leave a positive legacy for the world. And she actually had, a substantial personal wealth. And she found socialchangelab.net, which is the website for my lab. And she also found several other labs through Cindy Galwa, the professor here at UQ that many of you know. And so, to make a long story short, when she passed away, Mary Lee left more than $1 million to the Social Change Lab. And of course, I had never expected or anticipated that kind of philanthropy. And so what I did was I endowed it so that as long as I'm at UQ, there would be this incoming support for the kind of projects Mary was interested in that I'll tell you about in a moment. And after I retire or leave UQ or pass away, that bequest will become associated with other scholars who study social change here in the department. And it could become a perk of a chair of the psychology of social change, according to the head of school at the time, Virginia Slaughter. So, I mean, just a wonderful thing that Mary has done for us here in the lab, but also thinking for the world, right? So the kinds of things that she wrote to me about at the time were about wanting to facilitate peace, to create a better world, and to do that through communication, through science, and through research. And so she had a vision that it was possible to, get excited about the world that we're all part of, and that by increasing understanding and knowledge and communicating and sharing, that there would be a difference that would flow through. And the 3 themes that she spoke about were peace and democracy and a sustainable environment. And so when the ceremony was held, when the bequest was officially announced here at UQ, her best friend spoke about that and said, Mary pursued betterment of the world. She longed for a world where every human is respected equally and free to live their true selves. And she hoped that the bequest would help to achieve that objective, to understand the world and change it for the better. Well, you may be thinking, like, how does this lead into a seminar series? I guess part of what I've been doing in that time, and also more broadly in my own career since I became a professor, is thinking about what would it actually take to get to a sustainable world? And of course, as Kelly highlighted, the problem is immense, not just in the environment space, but when we look around the world for peace, we can see wars, we can see the military budget, which takes an enormous toll of the investments that we can make in the future. And we can see threats to democracy. Many people would say that actually we have passed peak democracy and we're on a rollback. The pendulum is swinging around the world to authoritarianism. So, how can we understand this? One of the things that I was thinking was that it's clear when you engage these topics that you need systems thinking to approach them. In the last Nest seminar, I was one of many people that was fascinated and excited by the system maps that the scholars, Anya was presenting, that people were developing in areas like plastic waste on beaches and so on. It's the systems thinking that we're going to need to achieve the big picture solutions. But many of us are working in these disciplinary silos, not just within psychology, but within social psychology. Not just within social psychology, but within group psychology, the social identity approach, and so on. And associated with that is this problem, which I've learned is called distributed cognition by the people who study it, which is that our human brains are not very good at grasping the complexity of the world. And we struggle as individuals to become expert. And so as the mountain of knowledge grows, people are shrinking the expertise that they're engaging. And then the journal publishing model, of course, as many of us have reflected, dates back from the days of people engaging, mailing manuscripts and sailing ships across the world. So we have this kind of slow process where it's competitive instead of collaborative. And we all communicate in monologues where we talk about our own work behind paywalls and in disciplinary journals that are narrower and narrower, not just the Journal of Psychology, but of social psych, of political and social psych, and so on. And of course, associated with that is the devaluing of applied work and the disconnect of the creative energy of blue sky riffing and discovery work from practitioners and policymakers, the mutual incomprehension that can give rise to. And so I thought PEPSS could be a partial solution. Firstly, one of many structures that we need to create that's like NESS, like SIGN, that recognize and give opportunities and incentives for interdisciplinary teams. What I wanted to bring to PEPSS that might be new compared to what we've been doing in the past is the concept of dialogue as replacing the monological approach to science. So that instead of focusing on individual scholars presenting their own work, we would have that as a grounding for a second stage, which would be within the same events, where after talking about their own work, the scholars talk to each other and they try to surface and make explicit assumptions, gaps, assumptions that are contested, and opportunities for future research. I also had in mind that through PEPSS, we would try to break that disconnect between academics and practitioners and policymakers, and not only have a couple or a panel that's interdisciplinary, but invite policymakers to be part of the panel, to be part of the conversation and dialogue that would arise. And I wanted to take advantage of the instantaneous speed of publication by recording the events and putting them online to the world community, but also by situating PEPSS within the world community. So although there are 3 UQ networks that have badged PEPSS in the presentation today, I really invite and welcome the involvement of scholars around Australia and in the world community that would be part of it, and that will be changing the time of PEPSS into evening slots that might be welcoming for Europeans, morning slots where North Americans can be part of it. So building on the work of SIGN, that we could aspire to represent research from around the world and invite policymakers and practitioners from around Australia. The iterative aspect that I'm talking about is about making connections between those big themes of peace, democracy, and the sustainable environment, but also revisiting those topics so that we can reflect on what we've learned and what we haven't been able to progress, as the months go by, as the years go by. And so from the, perspective of a normal, seminar series, I'm hopeful that PEPSS will be adding something because of the triangulation of the problem, where people not only are presenting from different perspectives, but actually communicating to each other and surfacing the assumptions and the contested points. And students are therefore invited to participate in that through their questions and through learning. I also want to create incentives for students and ECRs like Charlie and others to become part of interdisciplinary processes. And I know that NESS has that as well, that focus on nurturing and growing the next generations. So that not only is there a line on your CV, there's the product of the talk that's published to the world community through the YouTube channel, Psychology of Change, which is the Social Change Lab YouTube channel, but also on the SIGN website and in the PEPSS website that might come up. And as we're talking about coming back to the topics so that you can progress understanding and engage debates instead of just having these one-off monologues. Associated with that is another initiative, which is a little more complex, called Leapfrog. And this is an attempt to get not just a product of a recorded talk, but an actual scholarly publication that would allow for fast interdisciplinary synthesis. So you might have a PEPSS session with a couple of interdisciplinary scholars or a scholar and a practitioner, and they might be talking about something like plastic pollution or what we need for biodiversity in Australia. And then we would try to bring into that panel a willing postdoc or early career researcher. Now, this person would become a participant in the talk, and so therefore they would have all the benefits that Charlie highlighted, the line on their CV, the networks, and so on, being part of an interdisciplinary conversation, which really is so generative and which allows us to question the models in psychology, which of course are primarily focused at the individual and group level of analysis, and connect in with the macro that feels like political science and history can bring. But then the ECR, this is the tricky part, would look at the transcript for the event and turn it in to a lightly referenced manuscript. And you'll see I put in the gobsmacking proposal that this could happen within a week or two. So it would really be about something short in the 2,000 to 4,000 word range. And that would then be circulated to the panel, who would clarify and add further references as needed. And then I've lined up some editors for open access online journals, so not behind the paywall, free to the world, that the manuscript would be considered as a commentary or theory piece. The ECR would be the lead author on that piece, and the editors would put it through the same stringent process as usual within the commentary or theory piece format. So the idea would be that the Leapfrog events have this focus of what do we already know, what do we need to know, what are the gaps, and that might be seen as something that's fit for publication in the normal format. And of course, if it isn't published immediately in a journal, it can also become a blog post for the conversation or the Social Change Lab blog series. So there's a written product in addition to this video product, which, you know, some people watch YouTube videos, but many of us don't. So having that written product as well, and hopefully a peer-reviewed format, is something that would be beneficial, and the wider audience that offers. So what do we want, you know, from the audience in this case? Well, as I said, we would love for other schools within UQ, for other schools and universities within Australia and the world, and for other networks to co-badge this idea and come on board. Of course, you can start your own as well. That would be fun. We also would love your patience as we develop this and your feedback about what's not working and your tips. Many of the early PEPSS sessions could be interdisciplinary, but not part of Leapfrog, because we need to get scholars and early career researchers on board with this. And of course, we'd love people to come into the working group. If you would like to be an ECR or scholar in this format, that would be brilliant. We're looking for people to put their own names up and to nominate others. We're also looking for people to nominate practitioners and policymakers that would not be that would be excited about this format and able to participate, and of topics. So just a reminder, we'll have this sort of 2 tracks in PEPSS, one which is a seminar series, which is interdisciplinary or which bridges which bridges academics and practitioners and policymakers. And then for some of them where the stars align, we'll have this Leapfrog format where we're able to get the written publication out of it as well. And through the bequest, there's provision for the ECRs who are involved in that process to receive some support and compensation. Okay, so I put a blank slide here. I do have some other initiatives that we've got for the Social Change Lab, but what I actually want to do before getting into that is spend some time receiving people's ideas and feedback. So I'm going to just stop. I'm going to have a look at, stop sharing, that is. I'm going to have a look at the chat. And I'm going to Yeah, see Katie Greenaway highlighting the value of TikTok. Absolutely. The younger generation. So each YouTube video, the 45-minute recording can be turned into a 30-second TikTok video with no loss of fidelity. That's what the younger generation have discovered. So we look forward to our TikTok experts. We do need you. We are not represented in our existing expertise and team. So I'm piling on board. Thanks for the positive vibes. Kelly, you're commenting. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Winifred. It sounds really interesting.
Great.
I'm down at University of Melbourne, and I'm just wondering if all of these sort of initiatives would be in an online format that would sort of be more open to other universities, or if it's going to largely happen within UQ.
No, it will be online. And that's what I meant about changing the time as well. We not only hope for people in Melbourne to come, we hope for North Americans and people in South America and people in Europe and Asia. So we really want to offer it as a series for all of Australia and for the world community of scholars.
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm excited. And if you want to represent and get U of Melbourne to co-badge this series, we would love that. Katie?
Yeah, what a brilliant initiative, Winifred. Of course, wouldn't have expected anything else from having you at the helm, but
I pay her to say that. Yeah.
I wonder, I really like the idea of involving, policymakers and people who are capable of affecting change on a societal level. I wonder if you could talk about, or I know you've thought about the kinds of political roadblocks that might be in the way, or the pressure on people like that to perhaps say something but not necessarily back it up with action.
Yeah, I have thought about this a great deal, and I think without spending 2 months talking about it, the short version is where I see real advantage for PEPSS is building up the kind of collaboration that my mentor had as a scholar in the old days, Don Taylor. He worked with policymakers both in immigration and in multiculturalism, and which is where the Indigenous affairs were dealt with at the time. And policymakers would literally say things like, we need research that shows X. You know what I mean? We need this research. And he'd be like, I can do that work. And so there was that kind of dynamic partnership over time that allowed, as a slow process and a process that is complex and fraught, people to be given evidence that empowered them to make particular points. Because a lot of the work that we're doing, and I know Kelly could speak about this, even more than I, a lot of the work that we do has certain flaws that the policymakers can't use that work as evidence. And it includes things like policymakers really need local evidence. So for Queenslanders, for example, Queensland policymakers would love to have a study that just replicates a particular phenomenon with Queenslanders. And that gives them something that matters in their context. They also really need to have community samples rather than convenience samples. So those are kinds of issues that can come up. So to have those conversations, to start those relationships over time, having in mind a 20-year horizon, not necessarily the roadblock that we face today, but how we're going to try and get through that. And trying to create those systems like what we're all thinking of, that the relationships are there for future rather than this kind of dysfunctional context where people look at each other and they're like, well, your work isn't valuable to me, or your politics are too stupid and crappy for me. And then so we're not going to talk to each other. And this is already happening in the environment space, but I think there's a broader scope for this. People like Fee have played a role in connecting in with policy and practice groups around multiculturalism and equality. So yeah, sorry if I'm going on. I know you know this too, Katie. Yeah. So let's see, who else should we hear from at this point? Frank, I wonder if you would comment. I see that you're not a psychologist, so that's an exciting start, as well as anyone that's here from other disciplines. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate you on a fantastic initiative. I think this is wonderful. And I think there's so much good work being done already that can underpin this.
Yes.
Not just a sales story, because that's easy enough to do, right? Or we're going to build interdisciplinary bridges, and it never happened. I pulled out this thing here. Can you read this?
Recent work by Australian social psychologists of interest to political scientists. Wonderful.
Yeah. This thing comes from 1973. And if I open it up, it's typewriter written. And the reason I pulled it out is because it shows you how long people have been calling for interdisciplinary research and how difficult it is to achieve it.
Yeah.
Right? So I keep this as a kind of relic in my office and put it I have to. But again, I think that what we're doing here could really work, because it's not a fresh start in some sense. It's pulling all those strings together and building those things up. And talking about policy relevance and policy connections with the policy world, I would like to echo what you said, Winifred, that what we see in our school is that the successful things are very local. They're very also out of the domain of the party political, the polarization sphere, right? So anything that's probably a challenge in the environmental space, right? That you immediately end up in a politicized debate, which makes that harder. But we've got people in our school who do crisis management quite well. They too dabble in psychology, but often a bit tentatively. So there's opportunities as well for me to look in the school. I'm thinking of Matt McDonald, who's probably already a member of the network. Kelly, is he one of the scholars already in there? So we have people here in the school that could be drafted in here as well.
Yeah.
And I think the problem that we too have sometimes is to make ourselves relevant to policymakers, because they haven't got the time to engage with heavy debates about ontology and epistemology. They just wanted some practical research. We also haven't got the method skills in-house here. So often our weakness is that we're rather qualitative than quantitatively. So building those bridges up is important as well. And I've benefited from that in my career by relying on people who can help me with quantitative underpinnings. So I'm excited about this, and happy to help out where I can.
That's right. And I think like connecting in with those institutes and policy circumstances broadly, so we can start to put together the kinds of documents that policymakers do consume, like 2-page summaries and white papers.
Exactly.
And so I think that'll be really fun. But I also see a role for discovery and connecting in, where policymakers can tell us, this is the kind of work that I don't know the answer to this question. So there's many examples of this that we could talk about. But recently I was asked by someone that's working in government, can you tell me, does it matter at all if science, so if you show to the community that science shows a species is endangered, does that matter more than if we just show a couple of people who are interviewed who say they're worried about that species? Is there any benefit? Can you tell me that? I said, no. But I could theorize about it, and I could do that study really easily. So that's a kind of opportunity. I hope that there can be a mutual feedback loop, not just where our research informs policy, but policy and practice can inform our research questions. I want to acknowledge too, because Cass is here, she recently won just yesterday an award for an innovative partnership, which is of this kind of thing, collaborating with a practitioner to frame new research questions. So maybe we could all applaud Cass. But also, if you want to comment on this initiative, Cass, as being based in the business school here, and how other people can come to this kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Winifred. Well, I've known about some of these initiatives for some time, so I'm excited about it. As those that know me know that I'm an interdisciplinary scholar, and so that means I work with people from different disciplines. I publish in different disciplines, and as Frank was talking about, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
But I think certainly Winifred would be aware that for example, this partnership from last night, this is something that we started small 7 years ago, and over time it builds up. So if you want to have impact outside of academia, just like if you want to have impact inside, it takes time, and you need to build trust and mutually beneficial relationships. So I guess just the only lesson is just be aware that things start small and they build slowly. And eventually I think that impact can be had. And so you need to, as Winifred suggested, look at those longer timeframes of thinking about the impact you can have over your career, rather than necessarily in the next year or 2 year, or what pubs or what money or whatever might come in. Instead think, how can I have that impact over a much longer period of time?
Yeah, that's right. And part of what I hope we could do is similar to what Ness and Sign have done, which is create communities where students can connect with people who are already doing that kind of work that they might aspire to do. They could learn from Kelly or learn from Cass and learn from Frank and so on. I'm wondering who else we have here. I can see 67 people. Wonderful. Have we got people from other universities or from other disciplines who might be interested in participating that want to speak up at this stage? And it's completely okay, I should say, to just chime in later. And the other issue, I'll just put what great to hear, Lucy, that you're representing from Monash. And we're hoping to hear, and we'll follow up with you whether you could come in and maybe be part of things. And great to see, Sue Watt, fabulous. Sue's fabulous work with asylum seekers and refugees has made an enormous impact. And many of you know that. And lovely to see people coming in from government as well, and Monash and RMIT. So I hope we can not only capitalize on those relationships that Ness has formed and Science formed and Social Change Lab has formed, but really start to grow them in a synergy. Christine, I know that you're there. I hope you're going to capture the chat. And can we also pop into the chat the email address for Sign? So what we're going to do is we're going to start a PEPSS e-list. That's not to try and steer people away, but just so you can receive notifications. The format for PEPSS, of course, is problem, or maybe I haven't said this, problem focused. So there will doubtless be some topics and some events that you might not be interested in. And we hope that you would just stay on the list and come in when it suits you. Our first two initiatives are going to be in the space of achieving gender equality in universities and in the environment, separate from gender. So October's topic, gender equality in universities. And I believe we're still finalizing our panel. And then our next topic is in the environment, also in the process of finalizing our panel and topic. So really look forward to your contributions. So please do join the PEPSS list by emailing Sign that you're interested in. That's right. Christine's just put that email in the chat if you're not already on the PEPSS list. I think would anyone else like to speak at this stage? Because the other thing I might do is just quickly introduce a couple of other initiatives that we're kind of do with the bequest. We're going to try and do. Yolanda or Kelly, do you want to speak at this stage? Okay, I'm going to share screens again then and go back to, sorry, and I would, if you put your hand up, you'll come onto the first screen. I can only see the first 25 people. So I'll just pause in case someone wants to put their hand up. But otherwise, I'm going to share screens and just quickly go through a couple of other initiatives. And I hope that this is loading for you. It seems to have frozen on my screen. Have you guys got the screen in front of you?
A blank screen. It's very exciting to know what's coming.
Okay. Moving forward. Oh, thanks, Cass. Okay, so even more wild than PEPSS is a project we're going to call Forward, which is a plan to compile all published work in Google Scholar for particular keywords into a database in Google Sheets that integrates across disciplines and that is summarized in a monthly 2 to 3 page. Now, how would this work? Well, I've looked up keywords like social identity and democratic activism and environmental collective action. And I've mapped how many articles are associated with each of these keywords on a monthly basis. And what I plan is that every week, in the first week of the month, undergrads who are responsible for particular keywords will go through the literature and enter all the publications into this Google Sheets database and code, what they did, what they found, the IVs, the DVs, and so on into various columns. In the second week, a PhD student will double check the undergrad's work, and they will draw out some dot points into a Word file of the key learnings or new findings from that month. In the third week, a postdoc will check the PhD student's work and will turn those dot points into a 2-page summary. And in the last week, an academic like myself will go through that and add, as well as check the postdoc's work, and the postdoc will have put in some points on critical evaluation, and I'll just finalize that text, and then we'll mail it out to anyone that's interested in. So what we're going to do in December to February is we're going to try and trial this with 3 keywords, one related to the environment, one to democracy, and one to peace. So as you can see, it's a project that would be so useful and interesting if we can get it to work, and yet at the same time is insanely ambitious. If you'd like to be involved as a postgrad or a postdoc or ECR, please send me an email. And I should say that the bequest will support some financial compensation for this role. We're also going to try and develop a project which we're calling What Works, where we'll partner with community and activist and advocacy groups from around the country in Brisbane, and we'll look at some campaigns that they might be running, and we will have a recording where a small group of scholars talk about the campaign and what they can see in it, you know, what seems to be in line with evidence, what seems to not be tested, what might be against evidence. Then the scholars riff about a theoretically improved version of the advocacy, and we will then work with a campaign designer for this, and to build that second version of the campaign, and then we trial them both along with the control, and then publish the data as long as with a 1-page descriptive report. And we'll probably again try and do one in each of these themes for a peace group, a group that supports human rights and democracy, and an environmental group in the next year or so. So with that, we're really looking for an ECR or PhD student, as well as a campaign designer. We're going to try and do one of these in October to February. So if you think you might be interested, it's not locked in what campaign we would work with or what theme. So please just email me and reach out. I also want to say that we're going to try and develop translational blog posts. So a lot of us have been doing this, including Sign and Social Change Lab, on a sort of informal basis for our own articles. But what I want to try and do is develop a system where people can nominate compelling articles that could be outside UQ and in other universities and also in other disciplines. And then a PhD student would be mentored by our team to write a blog post about that. And again, through the bequest, they're able to be supported in that with some compensation. And finally, I'm hoping to develop a system. This is more UQ focused as a project, but in theory, it can be open to people from other universities. But in the first instance, I may work with whoever's available, to be honest. So if you're interested, where there would be a kind of stairwell from first, second, and third year, where people could be doing, small projects or internships each year, working with community and advocacy groups to evaluate, test, and improve their advocacy and communication materials. And I'd love to have an academic that came into that project that would help to develop this pipeline of interdisciplinary energy that could benefit all of us and benefit the community groups that we're partnering with. There's a couple of other things that I'll just quickly talk about. If there's time, no, there's no time. Okay, I won't talk about these. I'm stopping now. But there is other energy in the group. So again, if anyone's interested, it'd be so fabulous to have people come on board. The way that I'm going to try and do it is just have little working groups for each of the initiatives. So if you've got energy and heart for any of them, please just put your name into the chat and or email me. So I'd like to close by thanking everyone for coming along today, and to encourage you to give us negative feedback as well. Like if you have any suggestions for improvement, or if you can see problems, really welcome that. And I also want to thank Yolanda and Kelly for inspiring this project through their, many years of past work building interdisciplinary relationships that also connect academics with practitioners and policymakers.